I stood beneath the brilliant chandeliers of the White House East Wing, surrounded by polished marble floors, decorated military officers, and conversations that carried the quiet confidence of people who had dedicated their lives to serving the country. Before we even reached the registration desk, my husband leaned close enough that no one else could hear him. His voice was calm, but the words landed harder than any argument we had ever shared. "Do not embarrass me tonight. Stay beside me, smile when you should, and let me handle the important conversations." I simply nodded because after years of marriage I had learned that silence usually ended disagreements faster than explaining myself ever could. At that moment, he believed this was the greatest night of his career. He had no idea the evening had never been about him. When we arrived at the check-in desk, Ethan confidently handed over his invitation. The hostess scanned it, smiled politely, and welcomed him inside. Then she turned toward me. Instead of reaching for the invitation he knew about, I removed another envelope from my handbag. The White House seal immediately caught her attention. She scanned it once, then looked back at the screen with obvious surprise before quietly calling for a nearby admiral. Within seconds, the senior officer walked directly toward us, smiled warmly, and extended his hand. "Colonel Madison Carter, we have been looking forward to meeting you. The president asked to be notified as soon as you arrived." I watched every bit of confidence disappear from Ethan's face as he struggled to understand why one of the highest-ranking officers in the room was greeting his wife like an honored guest. Before he could ask a single question, the admiral politely invited me to follow him while another protocol officer guided Ethan toward a completely different seating section. I walked away without offering any explanation because the answers he wanted had been hidden behind classified doors for nearly a year. The truth was that my story had started long before we entered the White House. I had spent almost 10 years serving as an Army logistics officer, a career most people misunderstood. Whenever someone heard the word logistics, they imagined paperwork, supply closets, or endless spreadsheets. Ethan believed exactly the same thing. He often joked that I spent my days counting boxes while officers like him handled the real missions. I never corrected him because I legally could not discuss my assignments. My work involved secure planning, emergency transportation, medical supply coordination, evacuation routes, and operations that affected thousands of service members around the world. Success meant no one noticed our work. Failure could cost lives. I accepted that responsibility because I had been raised by a father who served more than 30 years in the Army. He always reminded me that the best officers were not the loudest people in the room. They were the ones who quietly carried the greatest responsibility. When Ethan and I first met at Fort Liberty, he was completely different. He treated every soldier with respect regardless of rank, worked harder than anyone else, and admired people because of their character rather than their position. That was the man I fell in love with. Unfortunately, promotions slowly changed him. Every new rank became another reason to seek attention. Every medal became another story he wanted people to hear. Gradually, he stopped asking about my career altogether. During family dinners or neighborhood gatherings, someone would ask what I did in the Army, and before I could answer, Ethan would laugh and explain that I kept everyone organized. People smiled politely while the conversation quickly returned to his accomplishments. I convinced myself he never intended to hurt me, but after years of hearing my career reduced to paperwork, I realized he genuinely believed my work carried very little importance. The distance between us grew even larger after I was selected for a classified joint military planning program involving every branch of the armed forces. The assignment demanded additional security clearances, endless hours inside secure facilities, and complete silence about everything I was doing. Some days I left home before sunrise and returned long after midnight. Ethan rarely asked questions because he assumed I was buried under more administrative work. Whenever he did ask what I was working on, I simply replied that I could not discuss it. He usually smiled and joked that the Army must finally trust me with bigger spreadsheets. His family laughed every time. I forced myself to smile even though every joke reminded me that the man who once respected me no longer saw the officer standing beside him. He only saw the title he had created inside his own mind. Months passed as my team worked on one of the most demanding operations of my career. Senior military leaders from the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, and several civilian agencies met almost daily to prepare for a possible international crisis. Every decision carried enormous consequences. We planned evacuation routes, emergency supply chains, fuel distribution, medical support, transportation schedules, and humanitarian assistance for thousands of Americans overseas. The pressure was overwhelming, but despite the exhaustion, I believed in what we were doing because every successful plan meant families would someday welcome their loved ones home safely. Through all those months, Ethan remained completely unaware that the woman eating dinner across from him each night was helping coordinate one of the largest military planning efforts of the year. Everything changed when two official envelopes arrived at our home during the fall. Ethan eagerly opened his first and immediately celebrated after discovering he had been invited to a formal White House military recognition event. He called family members, friends, and fellow officers to share the exciting news. Throughout every conversation, he proudly repeated that he had been invited to the White House. What he never noticed was the second envelope resting beneath his invitation. Mine carried different instructions, a different arrival schedule, and entirely different security procedures. I quietly read every page before locking it inside my desk drawer without mentioning a single word. As Ethan spent the following weeks planning his uniform, polishing his medals, and imagining the important people he hoped to impress, I quietly prepared for an evening that would reveal a truth he had spent years refusing to see. The White House felt even more impressive once we entered the main hall. Portraits of former presidents lined the walls. A military band played softly in the distance, and every guest carried themselves with quiet dignity. Ethan looked around with excitement, whispering reminders about how I should behave around generals and cabinet officials. I simply listened because I already knew many of the people he was hoping to impress. After the Admiral escorted me away, I was seated in the second row among senior military leaders while Ethan was directed several rows behind me. From across the room, I could feel his eyes fixed on me as admirals, generals, and agency directors greeted me by name. Most of them had worked beside me for months through secure video conferences and classified planning sessions, but this was the first time we had actually met face to face. Ethan looked completely confused as his own commanding general quietly asked if he really knew the remarkable officer sitting only a few rows ahead. All he could say was that I was his wife. A few moments later, the president entered with the Secretary of Defense, and the room immediately fell silent. After the national anthem, he stepped to the podium and began speaking about the men and women whose names rarely appeared in newspapers, but whose work protected countless American lives behind the scenes. He explained that many of the people being honored had spent months working under strict classification, unable to tell even their own families what they were doing. Then a large screen displayed maps showing evacuation routes, humanitarian supply corridors, and overseas operations that had only recently been declassified. The president explained that intelligence reports had once predicted a major crisis that could have stranded thousands of American service members, diplomats, and civilians overseas. Preventing that disaster required extraordinary cooperation between every military branch and several civilian agencies. Then he looked directly toward my section and said, "Colonel Madison Carter, would you please join me on the stage?" As I stood, the audience rose in applause, and I caught one final glimpse of Ethan. His face had turned completely pale because he had finally realized that the invitation he had proudly celebrated for weeks had never been the real story. Mine was. When I reached the stage, the president shook my hand and thanked me for my leadership. I immediately answered that the recognition belonged to my entire team because no military operation succeeds through one person alone. He smiled and admitted that everyone who had worked with me said I would respond exactly that way. He then presented the Presidential Distinguished Civil Military Service Medal, while explaining that the operation my team coordinated had saved thousands of American lives by ensuring a successful evacuation under impossible circumstances. The applause lasted much longer than I felt comfortable with because I knew the true heroes included pilots, mechanics, medics, planners, communications specialists, supply officers, and countless young service members whose names would never be publicly recognized. When I was invited to speak, I shared the lesson my father had taught me throughout my childhood. Leadership is never measured by how many people salute you. It is measured by how many people succeed because you quietly did your job. I dedicated the honor to every military professional who serves without expecting recognition, and when I stepped away from the microphone, the applause became even louder than before. After the ceremony, guests gathered throughout the reception rooms while senior officials stopped to congratulate me. Several officers thanked me for the work our team had accomplished. And one Navy captain told me his grandson now wanted to become a logistics officer after hearing my remarks. That compliment meant more to me than the medal itself because it reminded me that quiet service could still inspire others. Eventually, I noticed Ethan standing alone near a large window overlooking the White House lawn. The confidence he had carried all evening had disappeared. When he finally approached me, his voice barely rose above a whisper. I did not know. I answered honestly that I already knew he did not. He admitted he had spent years believing logistics was little more than paperwork and confessed that he had never truly tried to understand my career. I looked at him calmly and reminded him that he had embarrassed himself long before we walked into the White House. Tonight had only revealed what had always been true. Before either of us could continue, his commanding general joined the conversation. The general explained that he had known about my work for nearly a year because of the classified operation and openly stated that the mission had saved countless lives. Then he looked directly at Ethan and quietly admitted his disappointment that an officer could spend every evening beside someone so accomplished without ever recognizing her value. Those words hurt Ethan more than any public humiliation ever could because they were spoken with sadness instead of anger. After the general walked away, Ethan finally asked the question that had been haunting him since the moment the Admiral greeted me. Why did you never tell me? I explained that security regulations legally prevented me from discussing the operation. Then I gently added that even if I had been allowed to tell him, I was no longer sure he would have listened. For the first time since we met, there was no pride, no rank, and no performance between us. There was only a man realizing that admiration for status can never replace genuine respect for another person. As the evening came to an end, I stepped outside into the cool Washington night while light rain reflected across the pavement. Ethan followed a few minutes later and quietly admitted that somewhere along the way, he had become obsessed with promotions and recognition, forgetting the woman who had stood beside him through every step of his career. He apologized not only for that evening, but for years of dismissing my achievements and making me feel invisible. I accepted his apology because carrying resentment forever would only burden me. But forgiveness did not erase what had happened. Standing outside the White House, medal in hand, I finally understood something I had spent years trying to learn. Real revenge is not humiliating the person who underestimated you. Real victory is recognizing your own worth even when others refuse to see it. That night I did not leave feeling more important because of a medal or a presidential handshake. I left knowing that quiet service, humility, and self-respect would always outlast titles, applause, and pride. That lesson became the greatest honor I carried home.